living in a war zone. Libyan refugees and civilians are caught in the crossfire as violence in Tripoli escalates. A Sudanese graffiti artist honors the victims of anti-government protests. And could Egypt's president be in office until 2034? A former Egyptian cabinet minister has insight. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCorry. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight in North Africa, where fierce fighting in Libya has ruled the day, and as Eastern forces and troops loyal to the Tripoli government battled Wednesday on the outskirts of the capital. The United Nations Refugee Agency is being forced to relocate refugees from a detention camp to avoid the combat. We get more in this report from David Doyle.
Casualties are mounting in Libya's capital, Tripoli, as a battle between forces loyal to two rival governments continues to rage. Among those caught in the crossfire, these refugees. Libya is the main conduit for African migrants and refugees trying to reach Europe, with many held in detention camps like Ain Zara in Tripoli's south. On Tuesday, the UN's refugee agency relocated 150 people from there because of fighting nearby.
As I'm speaking, I can hear there's artillery fire going on, explosions, and we're trying to move as quickly as possible.
And this was the scene near the camp. Soldiers loyal to the Tripoli-based government of Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj trying to block the advance of the Libyan National Army of Gaddafi-era General Khalifa Haftar, who backs a parallel administration based in the eastern city of Benghazi. The LNA seized Libya's oil-rich south earlier this year, before sweeping through largely unpopulated desert regions towards Tripoli. At the weekend, they took control of a disused airport and have carried out airstrikes as they seek to advance towards the city centre. But witnesses say the LNA has now lost control of the airport and withdrawn down the road. The latest cycle of bloodshed since Muammar Gaddafi's fall in 2011 threatens to disrupt oil supplies, trigger more migration to Europe and scupper UN plans for an election. But there's a more immediate human cost. Medical facilities have reported 47 people killed and 181 wounded in recent days. While most of those killed were fighters, the fatalities also comprised 9 civilians, including 2 doctors, the World Health Organization said. It's also triggered a wave of people fleeing their homes, with 4,500 displaced according to the UN, alongside the rising casualties.
Well, that was David Doyle of Reuters with that report. Sudanese Information Minister Hassan Ismail says 11 people were killed Tuesday during security incidents in Khartoum, including 6 members of state forces. Ismail, who is also the government spokesman, gave no details on how they died. Protesters in the capital are continuing to demand the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir. The protests began in December over high prices for bread and fuel and have since morphed into calls for President Bashir to step down after 30 years in power. Protesters are responding to calls by the Sudanese Professional Association by staging a sit-in outside army headquarters, but Khartoum reporter Dama Moyideen says there is no real leader of the demonstrations. Eyewitnesses have reported attempts by government security forces to break up the crowds, led soldiers to intervene to protect the protesters. Soldiers are being heavily deployed around city and outside the defense ministry. Now, Sudan's government seeks to stop months of anti-government protests that have left more than 50 people dead. A Sudanese graffiti artist is honoring demonstrators killed in the protests. Naba Mohideen reports from Khartoum.
On the streets of Khartoum, Asil Diab paints images of anti-government protesters killed in clashes with security forces. She says her art helps unite people.
And once I start painting a martyr in the streets, people as well, the audience, they stop and ask as well. And like I said, it connects me with the families and the families with the public, and there's an immediate connection between everyone that walks by the artwork.
Diab, who lives in Qatar, returned to her homeland earlier this year. She planned to join the demonstrations, but that changed after she heard about the protesters who had died.
And once I got here, I heard a lot of stories about the martyrs, and it was very emotional, and I just knew that I had to do something about that.
Diab started visiting the families of protesters who were killed. Then she began painting their portraits at the memorial on the walls of the buildings where they once lived.
Regarding the painting that Asil painted, actually, for me, it renewed the memory of Abdul-Azim becoming a martyr. Whenever I see this painting, I feel that Abdul-Azim is still here with us.
Diab's work now includes depictions of people killed in earlier confrontations, like Adila Mustafa's son, Mus'ab, who was killed in 2013.
When this painting was made, I wasn't there. Then I came and I was surprised. For me, yes, it's a painful memory. My nerves were tense and I cried.
Anti-government protests broke out late December over bread price hikes and fuel shortage. Since then, at least 50 people have been killed. Pioneer of Sudan's modern art, Rashid Diab, no relation, says Asil Diab's work is empowering the protest movement.
Freedom of expression in painting is very important. It gives the actual value to the Revolutionary Act. It fuels the Revolutionary Act. It increases its power, fame, and importance. It creates the pillars of a future civilized presence.
As Diab prepared to leave Sudan, she expressed hope that the next time she returns, there will be no more protest victims to honor. Naba Muhyiddin for VOA News, Khartoum.
International relief organizations are gathering in Beira, Mozambique, to provide emergency help to people affected by Cyclone Idai. In March, the powerful storm devastated parts of Southeast Africa, killing at least 1,000 people. Severe flooding from Idai wiped out roads and bridges, damaged more than 100,000 homes, and destroyed nearly 1 million acres of crops. VOA's Brian Patton traveled to Mozambique with a disaster response team and reports on the logistical challenges they face in mounting their relief operation.
As Cyclone Idai pounded Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe in late March, causing massive wind damage and extensive flooding, the American-based relief organization Samaritan's Purse started to put a disaster relief plan in motion.
So the biggest challenges are usually with logistics and communications. So logistics would be getting all of our supplies from where we've pre-positioned them around the world and getting them here as soon as possible.
Samaritan's Purse is one of many relief organizations that have set up field operations in the Mozambican city of Beira to help the impoverished region recover from the devastating natural disaster. Using its own DC-8 cargo aircraft, Samaritan's Purse brought in people and supplies that included thousands of tarps to provide temporary shelters after the cyclone tore corrugated metal roofs off homes. At the Beira airport, World Food Program helicopters are providing relief groups transport to outlying areas where washed-out roads prevent access by land. Samaritan's Purse was delayed in sending 16 metric tons of equipment and medicine to build a mobile hospital unit in the isolated town of Buzi, as other groups sending food took priority.
Things change on a minute-by-minute basis. Today actually was better because we weren't competing with a lot of aircraft yesterday. This tarmac was full of large aircraft that were competing for lift resources.
Disaster response teams constantly cope with adversity and unforeseen delays. A water sanitation crew had been slowed by a malfunctioning water pump needed to clean hundreds of wells in poor neighborhoods contaminated by floodwaters. The engineers were eventually able to rig locally purchased clamps to make the pump work again.
You've got to kind of piece parts together to try to get, whatever fits, and oftentimes we'll make up that difference by just wrapping things in tape and just getting it to work. So there's a lot of field fitting that goes on.
These emergency response teams in Mozambique are expected to wrap up their efforts in the next few weeks and return home until the next international disaster strikes. Brian Patton, VOA News, Beira.
Well, the newly appointed Ethiopian ambassador to the United States, Fitum Arega, on Monday presented his credentials to U.S. President Donald Trump. On Tuesday, he sat down for his first interview as a diplomat with VOA's Yeheye Zuhib, where he began by outlining the current state of affairs in Ethiopia.
What is the state of Ethiopia right now?
Ethiopia has been doing great reforms in the past 1 year. Since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power, a lot of things happened, and these reforms have brought many positive results. As you can understand, any change.
Yeah, you mentioned the reforms earlier. What I am trying to ask is the security and stability of the country. You know, there are grave concerns. You know, recent killings.
I was going to come to that. You know,
yes.
Any change, any reform has side effects. So I see those as side effects. The current government is focusing on explaining to the people that rule of law should be respected, and instead of making it by force, first is warning, educating, but now is saying enough is enough. So
economic stability as well.
What I see, the challenge is we really need to have the right strike, the right balance between democracy and rule of law. So I feel we miss that to some extent.
It seems like a whole generation has been inoculated with this ethnic division mentality for so long. It's how do you change that mindset?
Everyone belongs to a certain clan, a certain ethnic group, and everyone is different. So we should respect that. Everyone is different by name, the way we are created. So we cannot be the same.
No.
Even in a country where you have one language and one religion, there is division. Division based on height, division based on age, gender, whatever. So we have to recognize that we are different, and it's good. And we have to embrace that and respect each other. I think we have a country called Ethiopia. We have, a country that dearly needs our unity. So we need to work, in those areas. And media should help us in doing so. I know VOA is doing a great job in this regard. All the social media, people who think they have ideas, they should bring their ideals in a peaceful way.
Well, that was VOA's Yahya Zuhaib speaking with the new Ethiopian ambassador to the United States, Fitsum Arega. Now to East Africa, Uganda's Rwandan community is commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, which saw over 800,000 people killed in 100 days of ethnic majority Hutus targeting minority Tutsis. Many Tutsis fled the violence to neighboring Uganda. Ali Mathumani tells us more from Kampala.
The Rwandan Students Association at Uganda's Makerere University reenacts the bloody events that began in April 1994. Rwanda's ethnic majority Hutus genocidal campaign against minority Tutsis left over 800,000 people dead in just 3 months. 10 of those killed were Jacqueline Uwamwize's relatives, who dismissed her pleas that they join her in fleeing Rwanda.
And I was calling them, asking them, please, please, please go away, go to Burundi. People are waiting for you at the borders of Burundi. Please go, please go. But they were not believing that this will happen. And one day I called again, as I was doing it every day, and the phone was not responding.
Uganda has been a haven to fleeing Tutsis since the 1959 Rwandan Revolution, which changed Rwanda from a Belgian colony with a Tutsi monarchy to a free Hutu-ruled republic. It was from Uganda where now President Paul Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front launched attacks against Hutu forces, fueling civil war, but also ending the genocide. On Sunday, Ugandans and Rwandans honored those killed in the genocide. But Rwanda's ambassador to Uganda also stressed that a quarter century later, some wanted culprits are still free.
The arrest warrants have been issued, but indeed, in some cases, quite many cases, they have not been pursued. Efforts must therefore be made to expose the suspects so that justice and fighting impunity is realized.
Rwandan elders in Uganda worry that without the annual tribute, Rwandan youth who have no memory of the genocide may one day forget. George Bazatoha, who was born in Uganda after his family fled the Rwandan Revolution, says the memory is vital for his generation.
It gives me like a spirit of loving my country and loving my fellow Munyarwanda, my tribe mate, without considering whether he's Hutu or Tutsi or Twa.
For Rwandans in Uganda, the ethnic and power conflicts that drove them out of their country and led to the 1994 genocide are tragedies they hope never to see repeated. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Benz Makori. Still ahead on Africa 54. Insight on Egypt's controversial presidential constitutional amendment. But first, a look at Wednesday's headlines.
This art represents the heart of all the people that love you.
On Our Voices, we're talking about the news and issues you're talking about, sharing stories of development and growth across Africa, around the world, and in our lives. Topics that inform, empower, and change the rules. It's time for Our Voices with me, Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick,
and Hadiza Kiari,
and Ayan Bior,
and Orion Itangi Shaka.
It's time for Our Voices.
President Trump praised visiting Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi as a great president on Tuesday, despite the concerns of U.S. lawmakers about his record in human rights and efforts to keep him in office. The Egyptian parliament is proposing constitutional reforms aimed at allowing Sisi to remain in power until 2034, a move criticized by senior U.S. lawmakers and advocacy groups who are also disturbed by Egypt's repression of human rights. VOA's Peter Clote recently sat down with Amir Darag, a former Egyptian cabinet minister and a founding member of the Egyptian Brotherhood's outlawed Freedom and Justice Party.
Definitely, this is the final stage of the Sisi's aspiration to control Egypt. Without these amendments, he would have left office 2 years from now, maximum. But this way he's going to stay forever and probably have also projects to inherit this position to his sons, the same way Mubarak used to be doing. And this is something that is, to be honest, disastrous for the country, because it is being run as a military camp. There's no room for freedoms or expression of opinion. economy is quite bad, and actually the position of Egypt in the region has pretty much deteriorated. It used to be, Egypt used to have the leading seat in the region, and everybody was following. Right now, Egypt is not, unfortunately, is not in the good position that it used to be. So, for this to continue for 15 more years or whatever, this is a disaster.
But you have a sizable number of lawmakers in Egyptian parliament supporting this measure. So why are you against it when the majority of the people who were voted into power are for it?
We have to know how these MPs reached their positions. Actually, after the coup, there was extensive work, and this is documented, extensive work by the security agencies, the intelligence bodies, to recruit people who have very little or anything to do with politics. They don't belong to credible political parties. They just obey what they are told to be doing. And the parliament was formulated this way. So I would say that at least 90% of the MPs in the parliament are 100% following what the regime is telling them to do.
But some people in Egypt are saying there's a groundswell of support for President Sisi's government, and they want a sustainable leadership, strong, improved security, and that is the leadership, they said, President Sisi is providing. So that is why they want to extend his stay.
That was the case right after the coup. At that time, Sisi was portrayed as a savior of Egypt, who saved it from the dark future that it was about to see, and a lot of people believed that. And yes, at that time he had considerable support that allowed him to be elected easily as president, and then allowed him to stay in power and do a lot of things. But and he when he started, he was actually after a limited portion of the society, which is Islamists mainly, who used to be in government or related to government or having influence in the society. And he gave the impression to others as if they are going to have place to flourish and be heard, you know. But actually, it turned out that he is against everybody. He started to imprison all of his opponents, which is practically any politician in Egypt. Anybody who dared to field himself for presidential elections, the second one, which took place last year, actually was either put in jail or you know, put in under house arrest, including the ex-military chief of staff Sami Anan, a very prominent figure, and he is still in prison actually long time after the election. So people started to realize that this is not the free environment that they wanted. The other thing is that he made a lot of promises regarding improving the economy, improving the conditions people are living, and all of this turned out to be false. So people are seeing this. So now, right now...
Well, viewers, Peter Clotis speaking with Amir Darag, a former Egyptian cabinet minister and founding member of the Egyptian Brotherhood's Outlawed Freedom and Justice Party. Now, the administration of President Donald Trump has announced that it is designating Iran's Revolutionary Guard and its Quds Force as a foreign terrorist organization. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Iran's military is joining the list of terrorist groups it has been sponsoring. Labeling the Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization allows the U.S. to impose further sanctions on Iran and cripple the business that financed the military. Here's viewers Zlati Tahok with more details.
Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard is a branch of the country's armed forces founded after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Iran's rulers have used that force for the past 40 years to export the regime's revolution by whatever means possible.
The IRGC masquerades as a legitimate military organization, but none of us should be fooled. It regularly violates the laws of armed conflict. It plans, organizes, and executes terror campaigns all around the world.
Pompeo said the Revolutionary Guard and its secretive Quds unit will now join the list of terror groups it supports, such as Lebanese Hezbollah, Palestinian Hamas, and Hezbollah brigades in Iraq. U.S. officials say the designation will affect Iran's businesses, which help fund the security unit and its terrorist activities.
We're also
stigmatizing this organization. We're highlighting to the world, as the Secretary just did, the perils of working with the IRGC, which by some estimates controls up to or more than half of Iran's economy.
In response, Iran's Supreme National Security Council on Monday named the U.S. Central Command a terrorist organization and labeled the U.S. government as a sponsor of terror. Both the United States and Iran supported forces fighting Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, but the United States blames the Iranian-backed militia in Iraq for killing more than 600 U.S. troops and for decades of targeting U.S. servicemen around the world.
Inexplicably, the regime has faced no accountability from the international community for those deaths. Far from being an arbitrary attack on Iran, our pressure campaign imposes just and long overdue consequences for the regime's malign activity.
The U.S. designation comes in force next Monday. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, and here now is what's trending. A visitor to the Nigerian town of Ibo Ora could be mistaken for repeatedly seeing double. That's because it has one of the highest rates of twin births in the world. A 1970 study by a British gynecologist found that around 50 sets of twins were born out of every 1,000 births in the region. They are even recognized culturally through specific names. Taiwo for the firstborn twin and Kehinde for the second. However, the high rate of twins in Ibo Ora is considered to be exceptional. Locals say it's thanks to the okra leaves used to make a popular local stew. Well, next up, a gaggle of endangered Madagascan ring-tailed lemurs are helping yoga fans de-stress and connect with nature in Britain's Lake District. Now, the lemurs have been living in local wildlife park for 20 years. It was only when one of the primates came out to sunbathe and held a near-perfect lotus pose that the idea was sparked to hold the yoga lessons. A new word was coined for the Lima Yoga, Limoga. The Lake District Wildlife Park donates 10% of Limoga revenue to the Sustainable Environment, Education and Development Charity in Madagascar. The charity works with local communities to live sustainably alongside and conserve lemurs in the wild. And that's what's trending today. Well, that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC. That's Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.